I'm sure by now when it comes to Mr. Pandaria, you've heard just how overpowered the Warlock is. And it's kind of not an exaggeration. While in the first phase it's very close to everything else, it does scale particularly well throughout the expansion. From Cataclysm to Mr. Pandaria, so much has changed for Warlock, including the resource system for all three specs, but it still feels familiar enough that if you enjoy it in Cataclysm, you're going to love it in Mr. Pandaria. What we're going to do today is fly through all of the talents and have a look at exactly what options you've got and where they're strongest. If you haven't seen any of the other videos, I'm compiling playlists for every class for Mr. Pandaria, so you can check those out on the main channel by heading to the playlist section. Just in case you're on the fence of playing more than just Warlock, you can go and see any of the others as well. I will be covering all the changes for each spec in the coming weeks, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. And so you don't miss it, consider hitting subscribe, and while you're down there, hit like on the video as well. Why not? I'm sure you're probably aware by now that when we go into the pre-patch for Mr. Pandaria, the talents are going to change. What you'll be able to do now is choose between one of three very powerful talents every 15 levels, from level 15 all the way up to level 90. At level 15 is survivability and healing, so you're going to have a choice between Dark Regeneration, Soul Leech, and Harvest Life. All three of these are good situationally, but what do? Firstly, Dark Regeneration's on a 2-minute cooldown, and it's just a 30% heal for you and your pet, and then it increases healing you receive by 25% over 12 seconds. Now, if there's a fight where you need on-demand healing, or there's particularly heavy damage that's about to go out, so you're going to receive that 25% extra healing, it can be incredibly useful. However, I think you'll find Soul Link is pretty much the default for most Warlocks because it's a passive ability that you just don't need to think about. When you Incinerate, Fell Flame, Shadow Burn, or Chaos Bolt, all of these spells grant you and your pet a shadowy shield that absorbs 10% of the damage dealt for 15 seconds. Now, I would say in the vast majority of situations, this is actually the go-to talent because you don't need to think about it, and over the course of a fight, you're probably going to end up getting more than that 30% of your max health. Another option, though, would be Harvest Life. Now, while this is a good one, it does come at a DPS loss because what it does is increases the damage of your drained life by 50%, and the healing of your drain life by 150%. Now, because for no Warlock spec drain life is actually part of your rotation, if you need healing, you're going to have to go out of your way to cast a spell that's going to do less damage to give you the health. So ideally, you don't want to be drain lifing as any of the three specs. So any time that you need to use this because you think you're about to die, it is going to be at a DPS loss. And anytime you use Dark Regeneration when you didn't actually need to use it is also not going to be worthwhile, whereas Soul Leech is just a nice all-round talent that, again, I think 90% of you will be using all the time. Next up, your level 30 talents are all Control and CC. So firstly, you've got Demonic Breath, which is on a 20-second cooldown, and it sends a cone of dark energy before you, reducing the movement speed by 50% of everyone hit within 10 yards, and this is a 6-second slow. There's nothing wrong with this at all, but the other two talents are potentially better. Mortal Coil is basically Death Coil. It causes an enemy target to run in horror for 3 seconds and heals you for 15% of your max health on a 45-second cooldown. Now, this is probably the default choice, if nothing else but for the heal. And then Shadow Fury, which also will be nothing new, is on a 30-second cooldown, and it's an AoE stun for 3 seconds. Now, the AoE stun is going to be huge in places like challenge modes, or particularly heavy ad fights, because not only does it need to be used as a stun, if there's a few mobs all casting at the same time, you can more or less use it to actually interrupt them. The choice between these 90% of the time is going to be between Mortal Coil and Shadow Fury, depending on which one you need, and then potentially you could use Demonic Breath in PvP, but I still think even for PvP, Mortal Coil or Shadow Fury is better. The level 45 talents is actually dictated quite heavily on what you use in your level 75 talents, and that will make sense when we get to it. For example, you don't want to be using Soul Link when you're using Grimoire of Sacrifice, but this will make sense when we actually get to Grimoire of Sacrifice. So firstly, Soul Link, 20% of the damage taken is split with your summoned demon, and additionally, 3% of all damage you deal is converted to healing on you and your summoned demon. Now, this is really good for both demonology and affliction, but less so for destruction, depending again on what level 75 talent you use in. Next up is Sacrificial Pact, which is an absolutely monster of a personal cooldown. It's only on a 1-minute CD, and your demon sacrifices 25% of its current health to shield its master for 400% of the sacrificed health. Now, this lasts 20 seconds. If you've got no demon available, your health is sacrificed instead. Now, this can be cast while you're stunned, CC'd, whatever. This is an absolute monster of a personal cooldown, seriously. On 1 minute, you can cheese a lot of mechanics with this because it is a huge absorb shield that it gives you. Now, finally is Dark Bargain, which again is another super strong defensive cooldown. but this one's on a 3-minute cooldown, so can be used a lot less than Sacrificial Pact. But it prevents all damage for 8 seconds. But when the shield fades, 50% of the damage prevented is dealt over 8 seconds, and this can be cast while stunned or suffering control impairing effects. Now, I think it goes without saying that you can see with Dark Bargain, there's going to be a lot of use cases. On the basis that you take no damage for 6 seconds, obviously then you are going to take 50% of it over a short period of time. But there's a lot of mechanics where you can make good use of this. And quite honestly, while Soul Link is going to be a lot steadier damage reduction over long fights, on specific fights where you're going to be able to cheese mechanics or stay in when you shouldn't be staying in to actually put more damage out, Dark Bargain or Sacrificial Pact is definitely going to be the way to go. Next up is quite a weird tier, and I wouldn't even know how to classify the level 60 tier because it's both defensive, movement, and kind of PvP. It's a little bit of a mix. Firstly is Blood Horror, and it costs 5% max health on a 30-second cooldown, and while active, anytime an enemy melee attack deals damage to you, the enemy will run in horror for up to 4 seconds. And this has got 1 charge, but the Blood Horror lasts 1 minute. Now, this is definitely a PvP talent. I can't think of a single scenario where you're going to be using this in PvE. Quite honestly, out of the 3 of these in PvE, Burning Rush is going to be the one that you use 99.9% of the time, because it drains 4% of your max health a second to increase your movement speed by 50%. During Burning Rush, movement impairing effects may not reduce you below 100% of normal movement speed, and it lasts until cancelled. Now, trust me, there's going to be many times that you've got a Warlock stood there AFK with this on, and you just stood there spam healing him like, what is he doing? I leave it on myself. I forget about it sometimes. But this is just a great way to move from A to B without using your portals or anything like that at the cost of a bit of your health, or quite honestly, just for general moving around. It is an amazing talent, because the only other option is Unbound Will, where it costs 20% max health on a 1-minute cooldown, and it purges all magic effects, movement impairing effects, and all effects which cause loss of control of your character. Other than the fact that it also removes magic effects, it's basically every man for himself, or Will to Survive, whatever it's called nowadays for humans, or a PvP trinket, whatever you want to look at it as. But yeah, being able to get rid of a magic effect off yourself is pretty useful, but quite honestly in PvE, that's what you've got your healers there for. Now, at level 75 is where it gets really interesting. Grimoire of Supremacy changes your demons. It makes them a more powerful version that do 20% more damage and have more powerful abilities. So you're going to get things like the Fell Imp, the Void Lord, Shavara, Observer, Abyssal, and Terror Guard. Now, this is a solid talent for all 3 specs, don't get me wrong, but really this is more leaning towards Demonology and Affliction than Destruction. Grimoire of Service is a really cool one. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, and it instantly summons a second demon who fights for 20 seconds. The demon instantly uses one of their special abilities when summoned. Now, if you're Demonology, for example, you can actually get out a second Fell Guard, so doing double Fell Guard that are both doing Whirlwind is actually insane AoE damage. For Demonology, it's really close between Grimoire of Service and Grimoire of Supremacy, but really, unless you're going to use Service to its maximum potential, then you'll probably be better off just with having the better pets from Supremacy. And then finally, Grimoire of Sacrifice, which is on a 30-second cooldown and the buff lasts for a full hour. You basically just sacrifice your demon to gain one of his abilities and increase the power of many of your single target spells by 15%, and you regen 2% max health every 5 seconds. Now, depending on what pet you sacrifice, if it's an imp, you're going to get Singe Magic, which is basically a dispel. If it's a Fell Hunter, you're going to get Spell Lock, which is a 24-second cooldown interrupt. Void Walker's going to give you Shadow Bulwark, which is pretty much the one that you should be using because it's an extra defensive. And Succubus gives Whiplash, so you actually get a knockback, which on ad fights can be particularly useful. Really, for Grimoire of Sacrifice, it's Destruction Warlock. The other 2 definitely are for Affliction and Demonology, but if you're Destro, just get rid of your pet, preferably depending on the fight. Your Void Walker, so you've got more defensive utility, but I still think Sacrifice for Destruction, and then the other 2 are really close depending on how well you use them, for both Affliction and Demonology. Just remember, if you're Destruction and you're running Grimoire of Sacrifice, using Soul Link just to get the extra health, which is what you'll actually gain from it instead of damage taken, is pretty pointless. You might as well use Sacrificial Pact or Dark Bargain, but at that point I would be using Dark Bargain, because even though the shield's really strong, I don't want to sacrifice my health. At least Dark Bargain is just a super strong personal cooldown. And then finally, the level 90 talents, which are really good, but unfortunately there's one clear winner for the vast majority of cases, and that's Archimonde's Darkness, because you gain a second charge of Dark Soul. As you may or may not know, Dark Soul is your 2-minute big DPS cooldown, where for example as Destruction, it infuses your soul with unstable power, increasing your critical strike chance by 30% for 20 seconds. So now it's got 2 charges, you can get through an entire Bloodlust, using it back to back for a full 40 seconds. For a standstill fight, this is number 1. For a fight that's even got a little bit of movement, this is still number 1. And then number 2 would simply be Kil'jaeden's Cunning. If you're not running Archimonde's Darkness, you're going to be running Kil'jaeden's Cunning, because you can now Malefic Grasp, Incinerate, and Shadow Bolt while moving. So it is only your filler ability for the 3 specs, because Malefic Grasp is your filler for Affliction, Incinerate for Destruction, and Shadow Bolt for Demonology, but you can now cast them while moving. And we should all know the ABCs of playing a caster. Always be cast him. So this will work out on medium to heavy movement fights as a much greater DPS increase than getting 2 charges of Dark Soul. And then finally, on a 1-minute cooldown is Manaroth's Fury. This increases the area of your AoE abilities by 500% and the damage by 100% of Seed of Corruption, Hellfire, Immolation Aura, and Rain of Fire for 10 seconds. Now this is good, but just not that good for Destruction, because Destruction, most of your damage is going to be Cleave. You're going to put Rain of Fire down, which is instant, and then you're going to use Fire and Brimstone, which basically just splits off your Incinerates and Immolates and Conflagrates and all of that. So it's more cleave damage that you're going to do rather than wanting a massive range on Rain of Fire. I'll be honest with you, even for Affliction and Demonology, I still don't see very many uses for Manaroth's Fury. You're still going to run Kil'jaeden's Cunning to be able to cast while moving, or get your extra big cooldown having 2 charges. But anyway, that's the Warlock. That's the Warlock talents. I think Warlock's in a great place. Well, it's actually in an amazing place in Mr. Pandaria, because like I say, if you enjoy pumping and topping damage meters as a Warlock, you are going to be able to do that all the way through the expansion, and they do just get more and more overpowered as each tier goes on. So cool, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. Consider clicking the join button to become a member with the other 150, 160 people, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one.